At 1:47 in the morning, a security camera outside a quiet home in Tucson, Arizona, captured someone approaching the front door. The figure wore dark clothing. Gloves covered their hands. Their face was hidden behind a ski mask. And instead of knocking, they reached for the camera itself. Within moments, the camera went dark. Who was standing at that front door? Why was the first thing they did to silence the only witness looking directly at them? And what happened inside that home during the hours that followed?
By the next afternoon, an 84-year-old woman named Nancy Guthrie had disappeared. Investigators would later find blood inside the house. Federal agents would join the search. Digital clues would point detectives toward a narrow overnight window measured not in days, but in minutes. Months later, many of those questions remain unanswered. This is the story of those missing hours, and of an investigation still searching for the person behind the mask. If you enjoy carefully researched true crime documentaries built on verified reporting rather than speculation, consider subscribing. Every case we cover is approached with one goal: to understand what happened and to separate fact from rumor. The Catalina foothills sit on the northern edge of Tucson, where desert landscapes meet quiet residential streets. It's the kind of neighborhood where routines become familiar. Neighbors recognize each other's cars. Evening walks are common. Life moves at a slower pace. It wasn't the kind of place where anyone expected an investigation involving the FBI. That is where Nancy Guthrie lived. To television audiences, her family name was already familiar. Her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, had spent years greeting millions of viewers each morning as co-anchor of NBC's
Today. But inside this neighborhood, Nancy wasn't known as a television personality's mother. She was simply Nancy, a mother, a grandmother, a neighbor, someone who remained close to her children and valued time spent together. Friends and family described an active woman who maintained strong relationships with the people she loved. Nothing about the final evening anyone spent with her suggested it would become the beginning of a national investigation. Saturday, January 31st, began like so many ordinary weekends before it. There were no emergency calls, no reported arguments, no signs that anything unusual was about to happen. Later that evening, Nancy arranged transportation to a family dinner. Records later confirmed she traveled by Uber, a detail investigators would eventually verify as they reconstructed her movements. At the time, it meant nothing. Looking back, it became the first confirmed step in the investigation. Dinner came and went. Conversation ended. Family members drove Nancy home. At approximately 9:48 that evening, security records show her garage door opening. 2 minutes later, it closed. 9:50. Remember that time. Because as far as investigators have been able to determine publicly, that is the last confirmed moment Nancy Guthrie safely entered her home. Everything that followed happened inside a window of just a few hours, and almost every major question in this case lives somewhere inside that gap. For nearly 4 hours, the timeline falls silent. No confirmed phone calls. No public indication that anything was wrong. No outward sign that anything inside the home had changed. Then, at 1:47 in the morning, the silence ended. A Nest security camera activated. A single figure entered the frame. Dark clothing, gloves, a ski mask concealing the face, a backpack slung across one shoulder. The person did not appear to hesitate. Investigators say the individual moved directly toward the home's doorbell camera. Within moments, the device stopped recording. Later, investigators would recover and analyze available surveillance data as they worked to identify the person seen outside the home. Authorities have released images from that encounter while continuing to ask for the public's help in identifying the individual.
Think about what that moment represents. Someone approached a home in the middle of the night. The very first action captured on camera was directed at the camera itself. Whether that person was responsible for Nancy's disappearance remains part of the ongoing investigation. But detectives have made one thing clear. They believe the footage is significant. 25 minutes passed. At approximately 2:12 in the morning, the Nest system recorded what is known as a detection event. Something or someone triggered the system. But there was a problem. No usable video had been saved. Investigators later examined whether additional information might be recoverable through technical records beyond what was immediately available to the homeowner. It is one of the most frustrating moments in the entire investigation. Technology detected activity, but it did not preserve the images investigators desperately wanted to see. Then, 16 minutes later, another timestamp entered the timeline. And unlike the camera, this one came from inside Nancy's own medical technology. That timestamp was 2:28 in the morning. Detectives have returned to it countless times, not because it answers the mystery, but because it may be one of the last moments anyone can place Nancy Guthrie inside a connected world. Nancy had a pacemaker. Like many modern medical devices, it communicated with an application on her phone, quietly transmitting information in the background. It wasn't something most people would ever think about during their daily lives, until investigators began rebuilding the final hours before she disappeared. At exactly 2:28 that morning, the connection stopped. For detectives, that wasn't just another digital record. It became a fixed point in a night filled with uncertainty.
Investigators have not publicly said exactly why the connection ended. It could have happened for several reasons. The phone may have moved out of range, it may have been switched off, it may have been taken from the home, or there may be another explanation investigators have not disclosed. What matters is this. After 2:28, the digital trail ends. No additional confirmed electronic activity has been publicly linked to Nancy after that moment. For investigators trying to reconstruct those missing hours, silence became evidence in itself. Not proof of what happened, but proof that something had changed. By sunrise, the neighborhood looked exactly as it always had. The desert sun climbed over the Catalina Mountains. Neighbors began their Sunday routines. Cars pulled out of driveways. Dogs were taken for walks. Nothing from the outside suggested that inside one home, something had gone terribly wrong. Hours passed. Then concern began to grow. Nancy failed to appear where she was expected. When family members couldn't reach her, they went to check on her themselves. What they found immediately changed the direction of the day. Nancy wasn't there. Inside the home, investigators later confirmed they found blood belonging to Nancy. Authorities have not publicly described every detail discovered inside the residence, but they have said enough to explain why they quickly ruled out the possibility that she had simply left voluntarily. Within a short time, law enforcement publicly announced what the evidence was leading them to believe. Nancy Guthrie had been abducted. That conclusion transformed the investigation overnight. This was no longer a routine missing person search. Every passing hour increased the urgency. The Pima County Sheriff's Department immediately began assembling a timeline. Detectives started where every major investigation begins. Who saw Nancy last? Who spoke with her? Who was in the area? What cameras might have captured something? Every answer generated another question. Investigators interviewed the Uber driver who had taken Nancy to dinner. They reviewed surveillance footage from surrounding neighborhoods. Digital records were collected. Security system logs were examined. Every available timestamp was compared against another. Slowly, the investigation became less about searching randomly and more about reconstructing a puzzle. Each piece had to fit, and each missing piece became just as important as the ones investigators already had. Before long, the investigation expanded. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined local authorities. That brought additional resources, additional specialists, digital forensic experts, behavioral analysts, investigators experienced in complex kidnapping investigations. Yet despite those resources, the central questions remained frustratingly unchanged. Who approached the house? Why disable the security camera? What happened during those missing hours? Authorities have released images of the masked individual captured outside Nancy's home and have continued asking the public for help identifying that person. Investigators have not publicly identified the individual or explained what connection, if any, the person had to Nancy. That uncertainty remains one of the defining features of this case. For Nancy's family, every day without answers became another day suspended between hope and fear. Savannah Guthrie, joined by her brother Cameron and sister Annie, appealed directly to the public. Not as television personalities, not as public figures, but as children searching for their mother. Their message was simple. If anyone saw anything, if anyone remembered even the smallest detail, they should come forward. Investigations like this are sometimes solved by evidence that initially seems insignificant. A parked vehicle, an unfamiliar person, a conversation remembered weeks later. A single observation can change everything. As the search continued, the family offered a reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery. Behind every press conference, behind every official statement, was a family living through the uncertainty that no investigation can erase. Not knowing, waiting, hoping, wondering whether the next phone call would finally bring answers. And then, the investigation took another unexpected turn. Messages began arriving. Messages claiming knowledge of Nancy's disappearance. Some demanded money, others claimed she was alive. For investigators, every communication had to be treated seriously, at least until it could be verified. Then came another complication. As news of Nancy's disappearance spread across the country, investigators began receiving communications that claimed to have information about her whereabouts. Some were sent directly to law enforcement. Others were sent to media organizations. Several demanded money. For Nancy's family, every new message carried the same painful question. Could this finally be the one that's real? Investigators couldn't afford to ignore any of them. Every communication had to be examined. Every claim had to be tested. Every lead had to be followed. Because in a kidnapping investigation, dismissing the wrong message could cost a life. But not every message came from someone trying to help. Authorities later confirmed that at least one series of ransom communications had been completely fabricated. A man from California, Derek Colella, later pleaded guilty to sending false ransom messages connected to Nancy's disappearance. Those messages had nothing to do with what investigators believe actually happened. Instead, they diverted valuable investigative resources during one of the most critical periods of the search. For Nancy's family, they delivered something even more painful: false hope. Even so, investigators have made it clear that not every communication received in the case has been treated the same way. While some messages have been conclusively identified as hoaxes, authorities have continued evaluating other communications as the investigation remains active. That distinction matters, because this case has never been closed. Months after Nancy disappeared, investigators continue asking the public for information. No suspect has been publicly identified. No arrest has been announced. And no publicly confirmed explanation has answered what happened inside that home during those missing hours. The investigation continues to be supported by local authorities and the FBI. Every available lead is reviewed. Every credible tip is assessed. Every piece of digital evidence is examined again and again. Because sometimes, cases are solved not by a dramatic confession, but by one overlooked detail finally finding its place. Let's return to the timeline one last time. 9:50 at night, Nancy is home. 1:47 in the morning. A masked figure approaches the front door. The security camera is disabled. 2:12. The security system detects activity. No usable video is preserved. 2:28. Nancy's pacemaker monitoring system stops communicating. After that, silence. That sequence of events has become the backbone of the investigation. Every interview, every forensic examination, every surveillance review, every search. Somehow, they all return to those missing hours, and to one question: who was behind that mask? Authorities have not publicly identified the person captured outside Nancy's home. They have not publicly explained whether the individual acted alone. They have not announced a confirmed motive. Those answers remain part of an active investigation. For Nancy's family, the investigation isn't measured by press conferences or news headlines. It's measured differently. By birthdays spent without her, by holidays where someone is missing from the table, by phone calls that never came, by waking up every morning hoping today will finally bring answers. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings have continued asking the public to come forward with any information, no matter how insignificant it may seem. History has shown that major investigations are sometimes solved because one person remembered one small detail they almost dismissed. That possibility still exists today. If you've stayed with this investigation from beginning to end, I want to thank you. And I'd like to ask you something. Leave a comment below with the words, "I'm still here." Not simply because you've watched to the end, but because cases like this deserve to be remembered while investigators continue searching for answers. Every view, every respectful discussion, every person who shares verified information helps keep public attention focused where it belongs. Before we finish, there's one final thought I'd like to leave you with. Every investigation creates two timelines. One is the timeline detectives can reconstruct, built from surveillance footage, phone records, forensic evidence, and witness statements. The other timeline exists only in the mind of the person or people who know exactly what happened. Somewhere, those two timelines meet. The job of investigators is to find the point where they become one. Until that day arrives, Nancy Guthrie's story remains unfinished. A mother, a grandmother, a woman whose ordinary Saturday became the beginning of an extraordinary mystery. And until investigators can answer the questions left behind inside those missing hours, the first question we asked remains the most important one of all. Who was behind that mask? If you enjoy carefully researched true crime documentaries that focus on verified facts rather than speculation, consider subscribing. There's another investigation waiting for you on this channel, one where a single overlooked detail changed everything. Until next time, thank you for watching.